Talk for 2 minutes. We're done.
Or less.
Sound guy. Go.
Good afternoon, panelists.
Good afternoon.
For those of you that weren't lucky enough to attend our other sessions, this is session 6 of 6 on how to create affordable housing. I'm Greg Powell with the Urban Land Institute. We're very happy to have you here. We have 6 programs because of 6 basic steps that lead from defining the needs to developing the results. And for reasons you don't need to understand, we're ending with the first step. That's one apology. The second one is we have a very, very distinguished and extremely large panel. So those that didn't hear the story before, this started as a hometown summit thing, and it was going to be 2 keynotes and a series of roundtables in rooms that weren't going to allow an audience. And we said, no, we don't need experts talking to each other. We need to interact. So I had populated a whole roundtable, which we now, like the Last Supper, have opened up to talk to you guys as well as to one another. So with apologies for every one of you, you got 5 minutes each to be brilliant, and you are brilliant, and you could easily fill an hour each. And the skill of all of that is in the moderator. So this has been somewhat tightly scripted by Brenda Kelly. Brenda is our redevelopment manager for Charlottesville, and I'm very grateful to you for managing this very large roundtable. We look forward to discussing how we define the needs quantitatively and qualitatively.
Thank you, Greg, and with that, welcome to all of you that you could join us on this late Friday afternoon and beautiful day. As Greg said, we have a very distinguished panel of guests and experts in front of us, and thank you all for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us in the entire group. And to start out, I think what we'll do is we'll ask you to go around the room for the panel and introduce yourselves and just tell there's some information up on the wall also, but talk about who you are, what you are, and how you address affordable housing needs, or maybe you have a way to fill those needs or solve those needs. So if you could just give us kind of a short version bio and how you're involved in this discussion, we would appreciate that. So I'll start with Anita.
Thank you. I'm Anita Morrison. I'm principal with Partners for Economic Solutions. We're the numbers people. We do a lot of analysis, taking all the data and translating it to trying to quantify some of these needs and then adding policy discussions to them as well.
Good afternoon, Chris Thompson with Virginia Housing Development Authority. We are the state housing finance agency. We have a variety of products to help encourage multifamily rental development, homeownership development, and more recently we've gotten into more of the kind of grants realm where we're working with a lot of our partners to help fund what we call pre-development and project planning as well as needs assessments.
Hello, Chip Morals. I'm the Executive Director of the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. We're very, very happy to have you in our building yesterday, today, and tomorrow morning. Our commission, made up of mostly elected officials from a 6-jurisdiction region that includes Charlottesville and Albemarle, but also Louisa, Nelson, Fluvanna, and Greene, 6. And just about several months ago, our commission determined that housing should be one of our critical priorities among the other issues that we try to address, predominantly transportation, environmental qualities, and some economic community development. And so we've started looking at housing, all housing within our region, knowing that, as many of you have seen, so many of the elements of trying to develop affordable housing includes quality of life, includes transportation issues. So we look at those on a regional basis and the comprehensive nature of housing in general.
I am Stacy Peppian. I'm the Housing Program Coordinator for the City of Charlottesville. I manage the Affordable Housing Fund, and beyond that, I try to find ways to make affordable housing development and preservation happen in the city.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Graham. I'm the Director of Community Development for Albemarle County. Community Development serves as the staff support for the Board of Development of Housing Policy. We also then are responsible for the implementation of that policy, whether that's through the county's current affordable housing policy, community development block grants that we're working on, and other programs.
I'm Mike Signer. I'm a member of Charleston City Council. I just want to recognize my colleague Wes Bellamy, who's with us in the audience, which is great. And our role is we vote on, where appropriate, when under our procedures, we vote on the projects, and we vote on them both when, and we conceptualize them also depending on the case, but we decide on when there's a vote and when there's political will do something, but we also set policy. So that's another role of city council in our form of government. We've got a council manager form of government where council is a part-time policy making and budgetary role. City manager runs the day-to-day operations of government with some of the staff that we see here. The council has a real role to play in affordable housing decisions.
Can I just interject? What's true about being up there? Everybody said, why'd you get up there? The answer is because Tom double booked him. And he's kind enough just to say hello and slip in. I don't know if you want to say anything, but he has a 4 o'clock elsewhere. And we didn't feel lacking in expertise, so we excused him for the other day.
Well, I just say thank you guys for coming, and kudos to my colleague, Councilor Signer, as well as Ms. Jones. You all are in really good hands. There's a lot of smart people up there, so rest assured you'll hear some good stuff. I'm going to speak out.
I'm Kathy Dimick. I'm the Director of Human Services for the city, and I'm a strong advocate both in my position and outside of that position for additional permanent supportive housing for our community. It's a solution that works particularly for homelessness. And I'm also a strong advocate for creating ways to engage our community in answering the conversation about needs rather than us.
I'm Anthony Haro. I'm the Director for Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless, and we're the lead agency for planning and coordination of homeless services in the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, Nelson County, Fluvanna, Louisa, and Greene counties. So quite a large jurisdiction, but I'm really also here advocating that once we do find out what the needs are, we have a real conversation about how to meet those in the best possible way, the most efficient way, to serve those who have the greatest needs first. And in the realm of housing, that would be folks who don't have any housing. Hello.
Hi, I'm Julie Jones. I'm the chair of the Board of Commissioners for the Public Housing Authority here in Charlottesville, the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority. I want to recognize Mr. Bellamy already, that's about a fellow commissioner, Mike Brooks in the audience as well. The public housing in Charlottesville, we have 376 units of public housing in 7 different communities around the city of Charlottesville. We also handle close to 400 rental assistance vouchers, most of those funded by HUD. So we're supporting quite a few family housing. And the board, of course, is, we have, like the city, we have a manager, our executive director, Grant Duffield, who I think has been on some panels earlier. But clearly, I think many of you heard our conversations about redevelopment of our communities around town, and so thinking about truly assessing needs and housing needs is a central question to our current work.
I'm Beth Kennan with Piedmont Housing Alliance. I'm a project manager there, and I work on a variety of development opportunities, and including Friendship Court.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Jacobs. I'm the executive director of AHIP. We are a home repair nonprofit, and what we do are critical home repairs for families in Charlottesville and Albemarle. So that's small emergency repairs, small, moderate, and large housing rehabilitation scattered site, and also target area projects in the city and the county. We work closely with city and county staff to administer these programs and make sure they get to the people who need them. We take field about 10 to 15 calls a week from people looking for help, and right now our waiting list tops 400. It's over 400 people who are waiting for critical home repairs. People tend to self-select. They call us when something breaks in their house and they need some help fixing it. Every year we help about 125 to 130 households with some form of critical home repairs, which is health and safety issues, energy efficiency upgrades, and all the things that you can think of that could go wrong with your house.
Hello, I'm Jeanette Kawachi. I'm the Chief Partnership Officer at Habitat for Humanity of Greater Charlottesville. We, as many of you might know, are an affordable homeownership provider in the community. We're a developer, we're a builder, we're also a loan originator. We've also expanded into sort of the realm of neighborhood revitalization and community development.
Yeah, we'll go this way. My name is Elaine Poon, and I wanted to start by thanking Greg and the organizers here. I understand that it was difficult to make this a free and open event, and I just want to applaud that. I really think that was an important fight to have. But related to that, I am Elaine Poon, and I am not here as a representative of the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, which has boycotted this event. I am not here as a lead attorney of the Public Housing Association of Residents, which has also boycotted this event. And if you want to read more about that, there is a statement that has been released by Solidarity Seaville about kind of why TomTom is a problematic event. So I just want to encourage you all to kind of critically think about why this is, this event in general, not this event, but TomTom as a whole, could use improvement. And I think Greg has made one of the first steps to say, when we talk about directly affected communities, why don't we include the directly affected communities to be part of that conversation? And actually, just related to that, I don't know who registered me, but someone put my badge, UVA Law as my badge, and I actually do teach a consumer law clinic. So in terms of, if I were to say why I'm here today, I spent the last several years in Atlanta before moving to Charlottesville practicing consumer law, suing banks after the foreclosure crisis in predatory loans and mortgage issues.
Thank you all.
That would be your friends at TomTom that registered.
And with that, let's give the panel kind of a general idea of our audience makeup. So those of you that are from out of town, can you just kind of let us know who you are? And then I'm assuming kind of the rest of us are all local folks that are interested in the topic. Okay, thank you, we appreciate that. So let's start at kind of a bigger global view of assessing housing needs. And let's go to Anita and Chris. If you can talk to us a little bit about the work you've done and the work that you do every day, and talk about what you've seen kind of regionally or other areas, and what kind of needs those areas are seeing, and maybe you even have some viewpoints of how they're being addressed.
Okay. Maybe if I could just give you a sense of what happens in a home housing needs assessment. Typically, it's a demographic analysis and an economic analysis, profiling, what's happening on the ground, what's your housing inventory look like, and what are the market conditions? Are there units available? Are they available at affordable rents? And then the meat of it is going into some detail and discussions with stakeholders to understand what are the forces that are keeping the market from addressing the needs of affordable housing. So we ultimately work toward estimating the number of units that would need to be added to meet the needs that we see. And I think for us, that's almost always primarily focused on affordability questions, cost burdens. So we measure the, how much the renters are spending as a percentage of their income. HUD sets 30% as the sort of affordability standard, and says if you're spending 30%, you still have enough money to cover the rest of your life. In fact, more than about 49% of American households are spending 30% or more of their income on housing. It means different things for different folks. If you're making minimum wage, 30% is probably still too much to be affordable because you can't cover the rest of your life from the money that's left. If you're at $100,000 and you're spending more than 30% of your income, that may be more of a choice about the kind of housing you're seeking, how much, what it looks like, and how big it is. So some of the other issues we look at are the concerns about transportation. We talked earlier, in the earlier panel talked about housing plus transportation costs as a key metric. So part of the issues of the housing, affordable housing maybe being developed in Albemarle County is that it's not accessible to people who don't have cars, or it's an expensive access, particularly if it's 2 counties out. Some of the issues we've just been working on housing needs assessment here in Charlottesville, and some of the issues are land shortages. We built out city. That's causing a lot of concern in terms of how do we build more housing if we don't have land. Housing shortages, we've got very significant shortages of housing, and that's driving up rents for everyone. And then things like government policies, zoning of course, and then how quickly projects can be approved and implemented becomes another big issue that we've heard a lot from stakeholders.
So again, good afternoon. Speaking kind of on a Commonwealth basis, you know, Virginia's a large landmass, and you can start up in Accomack County on the eastern shore, and 8 hours later, you're still not in the furthest southwest part of Virginia. So with that, you know, we see a lot of different issues that are out there. So the first thing I wanted to mention, since we're talking about needs assessments, is 2 years ago there were 4 universities in Virginia that did an analysis of housing needs across the Commonwealth. So if anyone's interested, that's now online at virginiahousingpolicy.com. So really good information, a lot of quantitative information. One thing I did want to say is that you can all be proud of in this sector is that it discovered that the economic impact of the housing industry in Virginia is $48 billion a year. So that's a pretty significant number that you're dealing with, and what it translates into is that's the 6th largest sector in Virginia. So all of you who are working in the sector can really be proud of what you're doing every day. It's a pretty hefty number. Kind of getting into some of what we're seeing. One kind of recognition we've seen more recently is that housing really is interrelated with so many other sectors, whether it's transportation, economic competitiveness, health outcomes, education. So there's been a lot more study at looking at how housing is interrelated, interlinked with these other sectors, and there have been some good partnerships that are coming out of that. Just some broadly, I tried to draw some summaries of some of the challenges we're seeing around the state. Again, because it's such, so many different environments, all of these may not be what you're seeing here, but one of the big challenges we're seeing in some of our older neighborhoods, older suburban neighborhoods, is the inventory's locked up. There's not really good housing options for people who've lived there for a long time, who are looking to maybe move somewhere else. And for the housing stock that is there, it maybe lacks some of the amenities, needs to be remodeled for someone who's looking to purchase a new home. So we're working in a number of communities figuring out how we can try to unlock this housing inventory and also provide some new housing options for the residents who are there now. To Jennifer's point, we see a tremendous need for housing rehab all across the state. I mean, it's just incredible. Trying to deal with dilapidated substandard housing where residents don't really have the means to make the improvements that are necessary. And I would say coupled with that is we've really seen a boom in demand for accessibility modifications. So a lot around aging in place, needing basic things from door widening, grab bars, ramps. We've seen a pretty significant uptick in demand for those types of improvements. In some of our kind of older, more central cities, we're still seeing, struggles with concentration of poverty and the larger implications that carries with it. We do have some localities and some redevelopment housing authorities that are looking at ways to try to unwind some of that work, but that's been baked in for decades, and so it's going to take a while before we can really start solving that issue. And then in some of our rural areas, we still see a lack or an issue around access, whether it's access to good health care, to just grocery stores, basic goods and services. And so what that's done is it's kind of stifled the demand for housing. So we don't see a lot of new housing being created. So we're seeing some of our rural areas that are just kind of in limbo or starting to decline because there's just no way to bring in more economic activity. And one thing that it really surprised me, what we've been hearing a lot of, is internet access, broadband, and how that is really a big influencer in people's decisions of where to locate, both from a business perspective and also just from a quality of life perspective. So let me just quickly talk, one other thing, whether it's affordable housing, workforce housing, whatever we want to call it, we still see a lot of pushback in communities that are willing to embrace that. So still, what's traditionally called NIMBYism, that we still see those issues across the state, and we're still working to do some education to try to combat that. So let me quickly talk about a couple of the highlights that we are starting to see. Housing as an amenity, particularly in downtown. So large urban areas like Richmond, Norfolk, certainly benefiting, but also some of our smaller communities, Roanoke, and then even stepping down to like Marion and Pulaski. You're seeing more of a renaissance in our downtowns where you're getting more businesses coming in. Coupled with that is bringing in some upper story housing, some mixed use, mixed income ideas that's helping to bring some more vibrancy into our communities. We're starting to see some innovative partnerships. I know in this area there was, I think maybe the first land trust that was created, so we're starting to see some more of those coming around to help combat some of the issues with land costs and just housing affordability. We're also seeing some innovative partnerships with churches and faith-based groups and doing some co-location with housing and some of those organizations, as well as entities like the American Legion Post. So areas where land is an issue, but some of these groups have the availability, we're actually starting to see some creative ideas come out. Also, I think something you've heard about a lot in the community here is mobile home parks. So not just in Southwood and what's happening in Sunrise, but we're starting to see a lot of other communities that are looking for ways that you can have some more mission-based nonprofits come in, take over ownership, and either look at stabilizing the existing housing or coming up with a long-term plan to redevelop and revitalize those communities. And the last thing I would mention, I'm glad you brought it up earlier about permanent supportive housing, that there's been more awareness at the state level around how to create more permanent supportive housing. I would say, entities, organizations here and with our sister agency, Housing and Community Development, have done a magnificent job in addressing homelessness. Still a lot of work to do, but there have been incredible strides. But that's also been broadened out to look at how we can create more integrated communities and better housing options for other populations, such as those with intellectual and developmental disabilities or those with serious mental illness. So again, looking at more comprehensive approach to permanent supportive housing.
Great, thank you for that. Chip, let's talk a little bit regionally now, and can you talk about what your agency's role is in assessing regional affordable housing needs?
Certainly we'll try. And we take approach, and one of our strengths with the Regional Planning Commission is to convene and help facilitate all of the stakeholders on a particular issue. So in this case, not just the local governments, but the nonprofit housing providers and the stakeholders, and most certainly the citizens that will be living in the homes and the communities. And we've been taking a look kind of two-way when we look at regional. One of the regional approaches is just a partnership between Charlottesville and Albemarle. The needs, the urban growth of Albemarle is blending into Charlottesville and vice versa. So with two jurisdictions, it's certainly regional. And one of the things we found, Virginia is a little bit unique, where Maryland does allow annexation like almost every other state in the United States, but Virginia does not. So Charlottesville's a little bit unique in that it can't expand its boundaries, which means even more need for partnership with its bordering jurisdictions, especially the growth areas of Albemarle County. I think Councilor Galvin talked about it earlier with the hydraulic area that has a small area plant undergoing. And then the 5th Street station area near Wegmans is another very high growth area where the city and the county begin to blend into each other. And so the Thomas Jefferson Planning District is working, looking at those regional aspects, but also the larger region of Charlottesville is the hub to our region. And whatever happens with the housing here is either affected by happenings in Nelson, Greene, Fluvanna, Louisa, and vice versa. And so according to how housing is developed, it can have positive or negative consequences in transportation, in traffic, in congestion, and or jobs, and or education, in schools, and many other things. So we try to work with all of our jurisdictions so everybody is working together the best that they can, and also trying to share ideas. A lot of our more rural areas cannot always attend educational events just like this, and so we work hard to share any kind of information or innovative ideas with their staff, help their staff to implement those within those jurisdictions. And then also to use that to partner with the Charlottesville and Albemarle area because they are so interdependent. A similar part, as Greg points out, is we're sharing these events on our website. All of the roundtables from yesterday and today are live streamed. We're saving those on our website so that others can use those as educational tools anytime into the future. And so that's, for us, it's the regionalism, it's the comprehensive nature of housing is very, very related to transportation and transportation to education and so forth. And that's where we bring our planning expertise in, hopefully to help not only the local governments, but the community at large.
So let's take a look at a little bit more local aspect and go to our city and county staff folks. And Anita talked a little bit about housing needs assessments. Can you talk about why that is important to have that assessment and how does it inform the work that you will be doing? Sure.
I've only been in Charlottesville about 18 months. So when I came here, I learned that the city in, I believe, 2010 had agreed to an affordable housing goal. And that affordable housing goal states that by 2025, 15% of the housing units within the city of Charlottesville will be supported affordable housing. And by that we mean any housing that receives some sort of assistance, whether it's a loan to help with site acquisition through the housing fund, if it was built using low-income housing tax credits, if a family with a housing choice voucher lives in that unit, that's a supported affordable unit. And I thought, well, this is good, I have a target, I have something to work towards. But then reading through that goal, I realized it didn't actually tell me what type of housing we needed. Did we need rental housing or homeownership housing? Did we need 1-bedroom apartments, 3-bedroom townhouses, 6-bedroom single-family homes? I didn't know. So it makes it slightly hard to figure out where to spend the limited amount of housing fund dollars that we have. So fortunately, I got to partner with Anita Morrison, and she's completing this assessment. And what that will do is then give me an idea of not only the types of housing that we need, but who that housing needs to be directed towards. We could spend a lot of time investing money in projects that would house people earning 80% of area median income, which as of this week, I believe is now $89,600 a year for the city. Spend a lot of time building housing for those people, but then find out that families earning only 40% of area median income have the greatest need in the city. So hopefully, when we are finished with the housing needs assessment, what that will then do is help me working in partnership with a whole lot of people sitting at this table, and a lot of citizens in Charlottesville create a housing strategy for the city. And then that will put forth the tools that we have available to us to build housing, put actual number targets towards those development goals and preservation goals. That's going to help us be more strategic in how we think about housing, how we invest in housing, how we decide where housing will be built. So there are some neighborhoods in the city that have more affordable housing than others, and some neighborhoods have absolutely no affordable housing. And the only way you're really going to create an equitable city is to begin integrating all incomes in all neighborhoods. It's not going to be an easy thing, but I think at least if we have some numbers to back it up, that might make my life slightly easier to get everything on the books. And once we have that, what we didn't include in obviously in our housing needs assessment, since it's for the city, is anything to do with the county. But I do hear that the county is looking into doing a study of their own with the PDC. And what that will allow us to do then is to work with the county to identify mutual needs, particularly within the urban ring, and see if we can partner on any housing projects in that area. Did I answer all of the questions? Okay.
Ditto. Seriously, this county's kind of in the same position as the city. We've had an affordable housing policy now for about 14 years. Has a 15%, an expectation of 15% affordable housing with new development that's going through the rezoning and special use process. We've learned that policy has a lot of struggles with it because we don't have a lot of the good needs data that we need. So we're looking at how do we better define our needs, not just the number of units, not just the AMI, the median, how close they are to median income, but also recognizing other factors like accessibility to public transportation, for example, or where are the schools, how are people going to be able to move around with this. I'd also note that what the county's put a lot of focus on, and it's an important part for us as well as with needs, is avoiding displacement. We've had a lot of issues as far as probably more with the elderly population, the seniors, than others who, thank goodness for AHIP, who can come in here and do these very minor changes to keep the house more available to a senior so don't lose it, so it doesn't then become, get redeveloped into something else. So I think that's been a very important part of it for us. The county puts a lot of reliance on partnerships. AHIP is one. Right now we're doing major community development block grant project down in Alberine to rehabilitate some houses. The Southwood, I think that most people are pretty familiar with that, but we've got some others, Brookdale down on, off of Old Lynchburg, which is 95 units. So trying to put a lot of this, an emphasis on partnerships, on avoiding displacement where we can, and then updating our needs assessment.
Thank you, folks. Well, with that, Councilor Schickner, we've heard talks about kind of what other areas are experiencing. And Chip talked a little bit about the need for regional partnerships, and our city and county staff talked about the needs for the data. So when you get all this information in front of you as a policymaker, what do you do with that, or is there other information you also need to be able to address policy decisions?
Also I don't know, Councilor Kathy Galvin is also with us, I want to recognize her also. I don't know, were you here earlier when I recognized Wes? I'm sorry. Okay, alright, so anyway, want to recognize my colleague here, who works very, very hard on all these issues. Well, and it's a pleasure to be here. This is a very large and accomplished panel with a lot of light to shed. There's so much to talk about this. There's a couple things I want to emphasize. One is that there's some hard and counterintuitive truths about affordable housing, that it is very challenging for elected officials, policymakers to have to explain to the public that they're important. The most crucial one, I think, is about supply and demand. So with the return to cities, with lots of people going back to cities and population growth in cities, what has happened in Charlottesville, the numbers probably now have changed since we were talking about this 1 or 2 years ago, but last year it was a 12% increase in population over 6 years. A lot of people wanting to be near a downtown cores, like what you have in the downtown mall. That was not the case 15 years ago. You had a lot of people wanting to be at nice suburban enclaves like Pantops or whatever. Now people like being near downtown areas. They want to walk. The whole change around the country, that creates, if there's a lot of demand, there's not enough supply, things become more expensive. You see that with everything, and you especially see it with housing. So the question is, what do you do to address that underlying fact of society and economics? And we did then we're also dealing frequently at the local government level with the fact that policy and decisions oftentimes go over a 2-year council term. So on Councilor Galvin's term, a housing study was commissioned that cost a couple $100,000. When council does these sorts of things, or staff does them, they're quite important. They're meant to be guiding documents, investments, requires a lot of work, community engagement, a lot of study when you pay a couple $100,000 for a study. So we did a study and it showed that this problem is what really was driving up costs. So there was an inadequate supply of higher income housing for higher income people, so people who made more money were snapping up the more middle income housing, and then that was pushing the middle income people down to snap up the $200,000 bungalows, and that is what you see a lot of the time in Rose Hill or Fifeville or a lot of these neighborhoods. And so what that means is that you have to try and increase supply somehow. That's what it means, especially when you're dealing with another counterintuitive hard fact about all this is we have an independent city, an independent county. So we really can only do stuff within our 50,000 person city. We can't, and that creates all kinds of complicated things. So as you kind of follow down your decisions that you can make, we have to increase supply. That's what was dictated by the study. And the problem with increasing supply is that a lot of the time can be very politically unpopular and very difficult. Like we had a really tough vote on city council about where we were on different sides, but putting 100 rental units, marketed rental units in a development in the in the Little High neighborhood that was a couple blocks from the downtown mall. That was, wherever you fell on it, at least on supply and demand fronts, that was a rational decision. Let's increase more rentals near the downtown mall because that will decrease the price pressure for people in the rental market. That was why I voted for it. And one of my friends doesn't talk to me anymore now because of that vote. There was a whole class discussion about people not wanting renters near them, right near the downtown mall. Very, very difficult. So I guess what I'm pleading for is dealing with all the facts about what lead to increased prices and the decisions that actually go into them. But one other thing that I'll say in terms of decisions, I think that it's valuable to look at actual decisions that are actually made and reverse engineer back from them, because we do, especially in a small city, it's easy to overstate and to create villains and heroes and to cast everything in one shade. Last fall, we did 2 projects where we doubled our spending on affordable housing in the last council. How do we spend that money? There was the Carlton Views 2 project, which we spent $1.4 million on, that created 48 new units of housing. And then there was the Community Services project we spent $612,000 on, that created 35 new units of affordable housing. This was last November and December. That's in a city of 50,000 people, that was 83 new units. We're not a city of 500,000 or 5 million people, we're a city of 50,000. And so a lot of the time the victories, and when you deal with this, you have to have a developer who knows how to use the 30-year tax credits, you have to have developable land, you have to have the zoning things worked out. A lot has to go right, and there's a lot of staff work that goes into these and a lot of political work. And those were small but real victories here. But I'd be hard pressed to think that they actually registered politically as this, as making progress, but they did make progress. So anyway, those are a few thoughts.
Thank you for that, appreciate it. So we've talked a little bit about the quantitative needs, or how to address them, where the needs are, how we get to the numbers, how we kind of work at setting policy and what that policy means. Can our member partner entities talk to us a little bit about qualitative needs? So when policy is set and we kind of have the numbers showing what the needs are, or get to where we're showing what the needs are, where do we go from there? What do we do with those numbers or those facts and figures or that information? And how do we get to the qualitative issues that you all deal with on a daily basis?
You're looking at me. But Anthony has the mic. No, Anthony,
well, you asked what do we do with the data, right, with the needs, and I mentioned that briefly in my opening remarks, because I didn't know how much time I was going to have, so. But I think that's really a really important question, is we have limited resources to get at a need that we can't serve everybody in need for. That's especially true of homeless services. And I think when we have an honest conversation about our priorities in a community, especially when it comes to housing, in my opinion, it's really important to talk about what is the greatest need for housing in a community. And I think, for me, maybe that's why I do the work I do, but it naturally comes to the surface that there are households who don't have any housing in the community that should be at the top of that priority list. And that happens sometimes in policy, but not enough. And I think that that's really important for us to keep in mind, that it is possible to make the highest needs the highest priority in regards to housing services, whether that be rental subsidies, supportive services, or new development. But it just doesn't always happen that way for different reasons. But when you do, I think you get a couple of great kickbacks, which is one, it's the right thing to do, to provide those in greatest need with services first. But you also get a great resource kickback financially as a community, because it just so happens that people who don't have any housing are incredibly costly on our community in terms of, because housing is healthcare, people without housing have really bad health a lot of the time and go to the ER a lot of the time for basic healthcare needs, or really extreme healthcare needs, or go to the jail frequently because they don't have anywhere else to go on a cold night. So you get a lot of great benefits by addressing the greatest needs first. And so I just like to advocate that if we're talking about what we do with the data once we have it, let's really be honest and let's really be targeted with our resources to the greatest needs as much as possible. Khaki.
I actually was just rubbing my eye, but Anthony and all of you, thank you so much for your comments, and I really love having sort of the full spectrum of how we go about thinking about housing needs here. And as we all know, the data is incredibly important. We can't make good strategies or policies without great data. But as you mentioned, there's some qualitative pieces to that as well. And I actually feel like, particularly when you get to addressing housing needs for low wealth individuals, that it's a really intimate conversation, because it isn't just always about housing. And I guess, you know, as we look at the data, I want to make sort of 2 points. One is that we be respectful and really authentic in how we go about housing assessments within lower income communities when we're looking at affordable housing creation and policy. And I also, I'm so excited to see some of the data that's coming out and then having conversations with so many different people on the panel here because, we're beginning to get even more information from our assessments on all the different levels at which folks do need support, and those change. And what's the challenge with, public housing and permanent supportive housing and, being in your own home but, needing some support for some repairs or being in, almost able to purchase a home, is that those situations can change quickly over time. And when we're looking at supply issues in our community, where our real challenge is that you can't make good shifts. There's nowhere to shift to. If you're in public housing right now, you can get a job, you can be doing great, you can be earning money, you might want to move. There's nowhere to go in Charlottesville. There's not that next tier of housing available. And so yes, you have to take pressure from the top up, but you also have to create inventory at the lowest level, but at the next little bit and the next little bit and the next little bit, because right now you end up in Louisa and Green, and then you create really interesting questions for Chip, and about, services in rural areas, and transportation problems in Charlottesville. And so, as we're thinking about our strategy, the problems we have so many boxes that we put people in. We have so many people in public housing who could really benefit from having more availability and fluidity to flex in and out of supportive housing. Public housing is not supportive housing. Public housing is a unit. We are not funded by HUD or anyone else to provide any resident services that you might think a community like ours should have. And so, but I think so we need to be able to have data to have those conversations, but we also need to be able to get that data in a respectful, really conversation building kind of way, so that our assessment isn't just numbers and income, it's also a deep conversation about where do you want to be in 5 years, how can we help you get there, what are your needs, we talked about accessibility needs in public housing. We have in our 376 units, at least 75% of our households have either the head of household or someone in that household who's disabled. That's sometimes physical disabilities, it's sometimes other kinds of disabilities, but it creates different kinds of conversations and needs.
I'll just sort of piggyback on that. I think, and I know that the city and Stacey is planning to do an additional kind of community engagement process to really complement the quantitative data, and we're sort of in the process in committees to kind of talk about what that process does look like. But we spoke about kind of the need to really dig deep into what lies behind those numbers in terms of individual barriers to accessing housing, right? And so, what is the day-to-day experience of racial discrimination when it comes to housing, right? And so maybe that, which might suggest our need to really do a lot more outreach to landlords to ensure that if we do have, subsidies or vouchers are available, right? Theoretically, you would think, okay, that should help the housing problem, but if on the side of the supply, there's just landlords that aren't willing to rent to those folks. We need to develop a strategy that's going to address that. The other point that I want to make is that my hope is that this needs assessment is really kind of going to take a very comprehensive and holistic picture of the problem, and that it's not just a discussion of units of supply. And I think that's something that Habitat we think a lot about. So at Habitat, the households that we serve range between 25% to 60% AMI, and traditionally Habitat's really served folks between 40 and 80% of AMI. And that's, a commitment and an investment that we've made, recognizing that wealth creation and equity building is an important part of the affordable housing problem. And so we need to address the demand side of affordable housing as well, and not just see this as sort of a supply issue. And speaking to what Julie was saying, that in the needs assessment, our hope is that we assess not only needs, but what do people aspire to. And so instead of assuming that somebody that, we have a group of people that are at 25 to 35% AMI, they only deserve rental housing opportunities, I think that would be a mistake. And so really taking sort of a holistic perspective, and sort of in that line of, this is not just a units issue, thinking really kind of holistically about not separating the development of housing from the development of communities. And so what are the kinds of resources, what is the kind of investment that we're willing to make? Stacey talked about mixed income communities. That's sort of from a development perspective, from a financial perspective, these are complex transactions or projects. But what's more complicated is not just the physical integration of people of different backgrounds, economic backgrounds, but the social integration, and making sure that we're investing in that component as well. So at Habitat, we do mixed income communities. We have an entire department that's devoted to spending a year with folks to help kind of generate a sense of community and social cohesion among people who are Habitat homeowners and then market rate homeowners, and making an intentional commitment to do that. So really kind of thinking very holistically about how we tackle this problem.
And I would just add, as we've worked, and on top of what Julia said and others, we've worked to really go door to door and get to know the residents. I think that's one of the fundamentals that you have to take in getting that qualitative piece. You have to know the people that you're serving. You have to know their stories. And that's time consuming, but that's where your most valuable information comes from on what are the impediments to their success. And forging that very sincere, genuine relationship that you go back, you know their story, they know yours, is such an important part of the equation, because statistics are wonderful, they tell you a lot, but when you know the person's story, how they ended up there, or where they live, you know where they work, you know where their kids go to school, you know their children's names, you know what's a challenge. That adds a whole other layer to the equation that nothing else can. But it's one-on-one, it's one day at a time, and it's going to every single family that you deal with. And that includes if it's in the city of Charlottesville or if it's in a surrounding county, you have to know the people and you have to know their stories.
To piggyback on that, I think to the extent that we can provide as much agency as possible to people who are the users of this housing from the start, and not just during a phase that we call community engagement, but that in fact we're engaging people who are the users of these housing units or communities from the get-go as a matter of course, not just when we need the information to complete some piece of our development process, but in fact from design to sustainability, that we're engaging the people who are and letting them steer the process and not the data to steer that process. And that means these processes can be lots longer and lots more complicated, and certainly can be often much more sort of emotional, but I think that's where we get to the good stuff, is when we do that from the beginning and not at the end when we wish we had more time, that we actually start with that assumption that they're going to steer our process and not the other way around.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Which one to grab? I don't have much to add, everybody. I agree with what everybody has said. It's all good stuff. I will say that continuing to emphasize the benefits of affordable housing as coming first in the community rather than the reward for somebody having done something throughout their entire lives, or as in other words, housing is the reward for having made all good choices. Instead, let's put housing first for what the foundation needs to be, so that people have the wherewithal and the capacity to make it, to earn more, to study more, to have stronger families and better lives. And I will say that it is really hard to prioritize. I'm just thinking, in a micro sense from AHIP, like when we go into somebody's house and they need a lot. We might not have $80,000 to spend on a rehab, so we have to pick and choose. And extrapolating that to the bigger community, the needs assessment might come back with things that us as a community can't solve right away. So I just wanna, and that's not, I'm not trying to be a downer, I'm just trying to say it's really hard. Like, it's hard for the decision makers, it's hard for the staff, it's hard for the regional people, it's really difficult. So what I started saying about making the case for this to try to develop as broad-based support as we can, so it's not just the city housing fund we're looking at, or it's not just the county funding that we're looking at, but private donations and volunteers and intersectoral partnerships among healthcare and education, and trying to find other ways to address this issue rather than isolating it in terms of, say, building units. And I think that goes back to Stacy's point, where if we have just a prescription that we need 300 more units and then we're good, that ignores the need for the community building, that ignores the responsiveness to people's experiences in the housing, and that might also take other funders and partners out of the equation inadvertently. So making this a community, this is impacted on the community and by the community, and I hope that it continues to be a community effort.
So many things. So I just wanted to start though, thank you all for your comments. And I just wanted to first encourage everyone to think big. I really think that this is a moment in Charlottesville history, and this is the first Tom after August 12th. I think the community is ready for big changes. I want to push back a little bit about this kind of economics, the reality of the numbers, the reality of economics. And I don't think it's smart for us to think that economics and policy are not intertwined, and that policy can actually, I mean, the market is not, a free market that will just naturally lead towards good things. I think that, the city of Charlottesville has the power to make changes that can lead this market in a direction that that we need it to go imperatively. And I think Anthony started out on that kind of path of talking about the qualitative side, and let's think about prioritizing where money goes, where investment goes. And I can't be up here without mentioning, and I know a lot of people are kind of tired of hearing about Vinegar Hill. How many people here know what Vinegar Hill is? Great, okay. And how many people here know what West Haven is and the relationship between the two? Right, so the origin story, right? Okay, so only a few people raised their hands about the connection between those two places, right? Which is, we can't forget the origin story of public housing, and it's particularly unique here in Charlottesville. And I think that's a qualitative thing that we all need to keep in mind when we think about, how do we prioritize? Where do we strike first? Why does this matter from a non-numbers perspective of how are we going to craft our policy, right? Is that Vinegar Hill happened, and the only thing that the community got in exchange for that trauma was public housing. And, when you think about, the depth that Charlottesville owes to the community, to communities of color, I think that that's how I see affordable housing. And I think that that's a bigger picture for us to kind of think about, which is related to transportation, which is related to health, which is related to all of the things that we took from Vinegar Hill, the small businesses that were owned, the community, social ties that were there. All of those actually, this is related to the community engagement, and I know that that's such a wonderful word that people love, but I think that actually our community has a lot to contribute when it comes to what should this look like. Right? And I know that Sunshine's doing a little bit of that in his work at Friendship Court about what already exists in this community that we can make sure we incorporate in the new buildings that we make. I also want to just say that in terms of the actual numbers and saying is it qualitative or is it quantitative, I think those are actually tied. I think that this housing needs assessment is going to be really important for us to, again, think big. All throughout the last 2 days, I've heard over and over again people saying, Virginia can't do this, Virginia can't do that, or Charlottesville can't do this, Charlottesville can't do that. Well, I'm here to challenge everyone here again to say, we can change that. And there are also a lot of things that we can do right now. And the more numbers we have and the more qualitative and quantitative data we have, the easier it is for someone like me to go to Richmond and say, Richmond, fix this, and we tried this year and we're going to try again next year, and I think the more information we have, the better. So I think that the quantitative side is also very important. Another qualitative data thing that I really hope to see, and I do just want to say that the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition has been already compiling a lot of this data, just because I think the community feels like if it's not going to get done, we'll just do it for you. And so things I want to know about is, why, when you think about affordable housing, why there, right? Look at a map and say, why there, right? We need to talk about the history of restrictive racial covenants in Charlottesville and how that has played out and has persisted into now, right? And why we choose even, and I understand that, that Councilor Signer worked really hard on the recent project, but I know that it's very easy for developers to want to just put something in another corridor and build off-site. And we have to ask, why there? Why did you choose the predominantly African-American neighborhood to put your affordable housing, but not in the place that you are proposing, right? I think that those are related, and those are the kinds of information / data that we need to be thinking about. Related to that, I think we need to upend this deconcentration of poverty. That's not what the law says. It's just, I've talked to several people, nationally. We might want to deconcentrate affluent neighborhoods. I think someone said that on another panel. But when it comes to why does a deconcentration of poverty policy exist, it's so that communities who are low income and low resource can access resources, right? And so by pushing people out to the outskirts of this city, you are violating fair housing, okay? You are violating the spirit of fair housing by saying just push them out to where it's cheaper, push them out to where they cannot access public transportation, they cannot access their jobs. All of that data is related, right? And so I just encourage us, we need all the tools in the toolbox. And I just hope that we don't focus on like one or two projects, but think about what policies can we change that can really change all of this.
Thank you all. That's kind of the end of the specific questions I have for all of you, but is there anyone on the panel that wants to address something that was said? Or would you like to look at the questions? Would you like to address what you think is maybe the #1 challenge to either assessing housing needs or addressing housing needs? If you have any comments. And if not, we'll go to questions from the audience, and maybe you can think about that, and we'll come back if we have time.
I guess I'm a little surprised we talked about needs, and I only heard one number, 400. That was the number of people relied to get help. And who's responsible for looking at the indicators? How many people are looking for housing today? Who do you call if you want to find an apartment that can say to you, okay, you're looking for an apartment, how much can you afford? Somewhere, there's that data. Who's responsible for gathering it today? Instantaneously. That's what she said. That's a consultant thing. Are you on the staff? Then somebody, somewhere in the community should be responsible for keeping track of where we stand today. And I just find it amazing you don't have to.
I can answer that. So the free data comes out comes out through the Census Bureau. The data that would be applicable and accurate and really good for what you're talking about, we have to pay for, and it's not cheap. Which is why we hired Anita. She already has access to that data. I think you're right. What you're really I used to do that when I was in Washington DC, and I did it for the region. But again, it was free data that my company paid for, and I was able to access that. I think not just tracking the data itself, but I think having someone who would act as more of a housing navigator, so that when people are looking for housing, it wouldn't track necessarily the market statistics. They would be able to do is know where housing that's affordable to different household incomes is located. They would be able to work with the real estate professionals and the landlord associations. And so they would have a good idea of the vacant units that are available at any given time. That's really the best way to do that, and that's a full-time job. And that would also allow Anthony to reach out and say, I have someone who is actually ready to leave a permanently supportive housing unit. They've been here for 4.5 years, we've worked with them, they're really ready to go off and live independently. Can you help us find something with these specific amenities located next to it, whether it is public transportation, they can walk to the grocery store. I think that's the best way that we would really understand how the local housing market works. There's so many different data sources out there, and they all track different things that it's almost impossible to get a really good picture without spending a ton of money at any one time.
I'd like to also address that a little bit further. I think some of the numbers and data you may be talking about, a lot of our individual entities probably keep track of what's specific to their organizations and their needs. So I think that's out there, and I think with some of the better communication I've seen lately between the groups, a lot more of that information is being shared. So we're getting better at that, I think.
Can I just say a few numbers? So there's a new eviction tool that's out right now.
196 in 2016.
Well, so I went by how many evictions filed, right? Albemarle County, 1,308 evictions filed in 2016, 589 in Charlottesville. I just pulled Legal Aid Justice Center, and just to be clear, Legal Aid Justice Center predominantly or tries to focus a lot on impact litigation, so we're not taking as many individual cases. Central Virginia Legal Aid Services will be has a lot more of those numbers, but since 2016, I have 265 people, we handled 265 housing cases. That's just people calling us, right? So that means all of the other people just didn't either get to us. Hopefully they got to the other organization, which by the way is really just one person trying to handle all of those evictions. We actually did, as part of the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, because we frankly were a little frustrated with the city for not compiling the numbers, and a bunch of, and I can tell you this because I brought them out this week, underage college students calculated some numbers for us, and they think it's between 3,000 to 5,000 people who are cross-burdened. And I don't know if Anita's allowed to tell us her numbers yet, or it's still, okay.
Also, just for homeless services specifically, or people falling into homelessness, in 2017 there was 440 people that we documented who fell into homelessness. That's either had to stay outside in a tent in a car or went to a shelter. But homelessness is dynamic, it changes over time. So at a point in time, it's about 160 to 170 people in the community. About 130 are in shelters, and about 20 to 30 are living outside in our community. So I think those numbers are important to express, though, because I moved here from another community. Relatively, that's small, and that's a really good thing, but it's also sometimes counterproductive for homelessness, because I think sometimes people see it as, oh, it's not as big of an issue, but it is. I mean, those folks who have been homeless in our community longest, there's about 41 estimated chronically homeless folks with disabling conditions, been on the streets for years, and they're at risk of dying any day, because of their health conditions aggravated by living outside, which is a huge issue. But the flip side is I'm just incredibly excited about this opportunity. I mean, we could really reach a functional end of homelessness in this community because of the relative size of the need. So
I'm an optimist. I like to put that out a lot, but believe it's possible because it truly is. And someone said housing first. It was my friend Jen over here.
Housing first. That is the way to end homelessness, is housing. Greg and I were joking about that. How do you end homelessness? Housing. That's right. So it's possible to do that by
housing-focused programming.
So yeah, that's just a little quick snapshot of our numbers. Data is super important for housing services, and we are beginning to. We just shared with
the criminal justice coordinator about high utilizers of the jail system, and we're going to see if there's an overlap with the homeless population and how much of a degree there is an overlap. So I'm really excited about that. And one quick real thing I just wanted to say about the qualitative side. I think the qualitative principles that drive a system, or the underlying philosophies that say that drive a system, heavily impact the quantitative outputs of that system. So in homeless services, we've made a really significant change over the last 5-7 years, being low barrier, trying to be more client choice focused, but specifically trying to be low barrier, really going out of our buildings to really talk to people in different ways, to people who have traditionally not come to access services, has significantly changed homelessness and housing and homeless services for the better. So it is really important to look at what is driving the work we do and what are those qualitative aspects of our systems, because it will change the outcomes.
I can just briefly say that in the public housing community, we have lots of data, and it is true that because there's no one whose job it is to actively track what the need is locally, in terms of low wealth individuals, you do look at the wait list for Anthony's programs, you look at the wait list for Chen's programs, you look at the wait list for Friendship Court, and you look at the public housing waiting list. We maintain 3 different waiting lists, and last year we did a sort of in-depth look at those lists. You can be on all 3, so pulled out all the duplications. And given that there were about 1,000 families on waiting lists for public housing services or Section 8 services in our area, the challenge with that list is that some of them are closed. So there's lots of people who would join those lists if we open them, but for example, we've had a totally closed list for 1 and 2 bedroom units for years because there's such a high demand, as you well know.
Tomorrow we're talking about a summary of all this, and I guess one thing that's on my list for discussion is, do we care enough about this problem to have a consolidated, ongoing data analytics system?
I think that's a great question. I think there'd have to be investments made in putting that together.
Yeah, maybe they cost money.
I just think it's really, but I mean, it goes to exactly, I actually just want to echo what Elaine said. I mean, I think one of the things that is really fantastic, and what these past few days has revealed, or what we already know, but it's sort of really brought together, is that we're at an incredibly interesting point in time, given the nature of conversations and what's been happening in the Charlottesville area since last summer, and that we have very clearly stated as a community through those conversations that we value affordability and more access to all that Charlottesville has to offer for everyone who's here. That's not true of a lot of communities. I mean, Chip and Anita and Chris, who work all across the state, will tell you they are looking to ship people out. And not only are we looking to, make Charlottesville better for everyone, we're making in Charlottesville Albemarle deep commitments to non-displacement, which is, fighting gentrification, which is keeping those people who are with us now with us and making everything that Charlottesville has available. And that's really unique, and I really want to sort of applaud us for that, not us, but the community for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just add on to Julie's point, which is, and also to Elaine's, which I very well taken, that it's a moment for ambition and for creativity and for pushing. I mean, we have, one of the things I think we were raising was Dylan's role, which in this state prevents localities from doing a lot of things that they're not allowed to do expressly by the state government, which is a huge pain in the rear end for lots of ambitious social policy. To talk about a broad brush approach where you're attacking this problem from lots of different angles, one of the things this council did, it's not to say to toot our own horn or at all, but just to call attention to the many different ways in which we attempt to kind of touch the elephant that is this problem. So we doubled, we have a program where you get a property tax credit if you are low income. And in this city council, because we know that one of the trends happening in the city is property taxes rising because of gentrification. So your bill goes up, and if you're on a fixed income or if you have no, very low income, it really hurts. And so we doubled. The proposal was to increase from like $500 to $600 or $700. We ended up increasing it to $1,000 if you're under which could actually erase the second half of some people's property tax bill. It could actually, we had a discussion about, would this lead to people getting a check back, or would that be a credit off the first half? That's like real dollars. There's a real attempt. It costs us a couple $100,000, a little more. I mean, there are attempts to try and reduce the pain that is caused by increasing property taxes. There's a lot more ambitious problems, ideas. One of them was dedicating all the revenue from this one project that was approved to covering the debt service on a bond that could go toward real affordable housing. Like, that's very creative, and we have to do a lot more work for that to happen. But I want, I'd like the bridge between ambition and just kind of small ball stuff is for everybody to work together on implementing really creative ideas, because the devil will be in the details, but there is like doubling this amount of property tax relief that we were doing for people in low income range was, I think, very impactful, and it was a really serious measure. We just passed the budget last week. So anyway, I just want to illustrate those couple of examples that are happening right now.
And thank you. With that, we'd like to we've got to kind of wrap up. We'd like to thank all of you very much for your comments and your participation. And Greg's going to talk a little bit about where we go from here.
First of all, let's all thank this incredible panel. So we've just had 6 conversations. I think the overriding first step at every step is engagement. We need to define the needs. We need to establish a policy and an implementation strategy to satisfy those needs. Then we design, finance, and develop. Those are the 6 things we talked about today. What I hope is clear is this is a complex issue that can best be solved through collaboration. It's not an accident that we've had 50 speakers in the last 2 days. And I hope that I caught just about everybody that has a role to play here locally. And I thank all of you for participating thus far, but this is just a first step. So let's talk about the next step. So the very next step is tomorrow morning in this room from 8:30 to 10:30, we're going to have an action forum. The format of that is to start with a quick summary by the moderators of the panels, for those of you that didn't catch all 6. We're going to ask all of the stakeholders that are able to be there what you're doing next. And then we're going to say, what lessons did we learn from our national experts and our regional and our local experts that we should be starting to talk about applying to our local problems so that we can start building more affordable housing now. So I would welcome all of you that can to please attend tomorrow. We have 50 registered, we have room for more. And it's going to be a facilitated discussion, and it's going to be led by Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, because it is a regional issue, not just
Don't do it.
Did I check up all the points? I think we did. So thank you so much for taking this 2-day journey with us. I hope you can join us tomorrow. We didn't reach some of the key people, except maybe directly. I keep pointing to you. I'll remind everyone that everything is on video. If you want to have training sessions, just tap on the websites. We do want to better engage with everyone. I made an error in judgment in my ignorance. I'm sorry.
No, I think you did a great job. I think everyone learned a lot from this experience.
And we'll find great next steps. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
I'll be here.